Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Cindie Chavez here. Today is Tuesday, June the 19th, 2018, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, your first daily dose of happy for the day. And glad to welcome Cindie back. It's always good to have her back because I only get her for, once a week or 2 days a week normally. And it's fun because every time we talk, Cindie, I always feel so much better afterward. And somehow, I don't know why this is, you and I get the really fun topics, the ones that are lighthearted and just exhilarating. I mean, the others, I'm going into all these deep, dark secret type areas. And with you, it's like, oh, wow, this is all great.
Well, that's kind of funny because I'm the one that's not really afraid of those deep, dark secret areas.
I know. I don't quite understand what goes on there, but I mean, that's what we're talking about. And I like it. I think it has something to do with the book because Money and the Law of Attraction, which we've been talking about a lot now, is a relatively lighthearted book compared to the other Hicks books that I can see. Not that there is no lightheartedness in the others. There are, but it seems like it had an extra dose of happy, an extra dose of positivity in it when they put it together.
That's really kind of interesting because I never thought about that before, like how one would compare to the other. I mean, I think I've read most of them, but never like so back to back that I would remember, oh, this one feels different than that one, So that's kind of an interesting observation.
Well, I think it's just because I'm currently immersed in 3 of them because I do this one with you. With David, I do The Astonishing Power of Emotions, and Wendy and I are starting to finish up the original The Law of Attraction, Basics of the Teachings of Abraham.
So you've got all 3 going at once.
All going at once, yeah. So I get a direct compare and contrast every single time that I switch co-hosts for the week, or for the day.
Interesting.
But yeah, so I think that's where that perspective comes from. But yeah, I don't know what it is about this book. Maybe because of the topic, money and the law of attraction. Maybe that just feels better to me. I don't know. It just seems like yesterday we were talking about the last few days with Wendy. We've been talking about these real deep, dark topics. What about sexual violence? What about terrible things happening to children? And it's like, whoa. Turn it off. This is getting to be too much. And with you, when we're talking about the stuff with you, it's like, oh, let's focus on regaining our health. Like, okay.
Well, I think it's interesting. I've been having this discussion a lot because of some of the things that are going on in the world right now that actually you just mentioned, things happening to children. And I think that one of the things we have to remember on this quest to create the reality that we want is that we live in a really big world full of people that are creating all kinds of things. And we are connected, and those emotions that we don't like to feel sometimes, sadness and anger, they actually are really healthy and can empower us to make changes in the world. And so to be afraid of them or to think that it's wrong to feel those things and that we only want to feel, happy. Like we talk about a daily dose of happy, which I think is wonderful. I always want us to have a many more doses of happy throughout the day.
Exactly.
And yet there are a lot of other emotions, and I don't think it does anyone any good for us to ignore them. I think we need to pay attention to them. And then I think we need to create appropriate strategies and actions to take, to move forward and to make things better. So That's my take on it. Right. But I think that there's a whole issue of, there's actually a term for it that you probably know, spiritual bypassing, right? It's like thinking that everything has to feel good. And if it doesn't, I'm doing something wrong. And it's just really not the case. We came into the world with all kinds of feelings and emotions, and they're all valid and they're all important and they're all giving us great information. I mean, Abraham talks about our GPS system, our emotional guidance system, and will tell us right up front, like, we're not telling you to pretend something's good if it's not, right? So
exactly, yeah.
I'm with you. It feels better to be happy and talk about like our subject today, focusing on fun to regain one's health. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's a topic that feels good.
It does feel good. And I mean, I completely agree with you. All emotions are a part of the human experience. Doesn't mean that I don't aim to have as many happy experiences as I can. I try to aim to, come as close to 100% as I can get, but I never get to 100%. And I don't expect to get to 100%. If I can get to 80%, I've had a great day. So, it just means that I keep aiming high. That's all. But I know perfectly well that if I don't have the other signals, because that's what they are, right? All emotions are signals. If I don't have the other signals, I can't really know everything that's coming my way. I can't understand it. I mean, I've been dealing with it with the knee injury that I've been overcoming, which, by the way, is healing. I'm very happy to report.
Very good.
But without the clues about where I was feeling pain, I would not have known how to take steps in order to heal. I mean, literally,
right.
I've been getting an education about knees. There's quite a bit about them, and one of the things I've learned is there are like 4 main ligaments that go through your knee. There's the ACL, the PCL, the UCL, and the MCL. No, I think I got one wrong there. ACL, MCL, LCL, and the fourth one is either P or U. I can't remember which. It's one of those, but. When you start studying it, you start seeing how they're all connected together. Well, now I knew which one was affecting me. I had an MCL problem, what they call the medial collateral ligament, which is like the ligament that runs along the inside part of the leg along the knee. Mm-hmm. And that's where, I could tell, oh yeah, that's where the inflammation is. Now I know that actually indicates, yes, I can feel the ligament. In fact, when I would try to stretch with this injury, I would feel pain all along the ligament. I could actually sense for a moment what the line of the ligament was. So I said, oh, okay, well now I know where to put my ice. And now I know where to put my healing attention. This is where I'm focusing my attention. And that was like within the last, 48 hours that I figured that out. And since then, the pain has dropped considerably. The icing has certainly helped a lot. And last night, for the first time, I was actually able to sleep with that part of my leg in contact with warm material, which sounds weird. But when you have an inflammation like that, you actually don't want that to be warmed because that just increases the pain.
Right.
Well, last night I was able to have it in contact with material that kept it warm, and I didn't have pain. I mean, it was still stiff in the morning, but I said, whoa, this is real improvement. So I couldn't have gotten there if I hadn't understood how the leg was structured, and I learned how the leg was structured because I could isolate where exactly I was feeling the pain.
It's a great example of feeling something, being uncomfortable with it,
yes,
and then
doing
the research, right?
That's right, yeah.
And finding out more information and what can I do to make this better? What actions can I take that will actually help this heal up? And I think that those are the steps, like regardless of what the thing is. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's great. And I didn't know there were 4 ligaments there.
I didn't know either. There may actually be more. I know there's also a meniscus in there, which is the separation between the upper and lower bones, and there's other stuff. And I'm not totally clear on how all that fits together, but I certainly know a whole lot more than I did, say, last week.
Well, I think I told you the story before. I had I had a similar thing, maybe. I mean, it was my elbow. So a big joint in the body. Mm-hmm. And my elbow was, as a writer, my elbow hurt so bad. It was preventing me from typing, from writing with my hand, from doing anything. I was like, okay, I've got to get this taken care of. And so I was icing it. The pain was actually on my elbow, the way your pain would be on a kneecap. Mm-hmm. And I was putting my elbow in the ice. It just wasn't seeming to help much. And figured out later that what I should have been doing was been putting the ice on the other side in the crook of my elbow, for the knee. It would have been like behind my knee, right? But on my elbow on the inside of my arm. And it was because of the same type of thing. It was that the ligament that was pulling so hard was actually crossing over into the front. And that's where all the tightness was. And I was like, wow, I was like 3 inches away.
Yeah, right. So near. Well, that's what I was doing. I previously I was icing the wrong part of the kneecap. In fact, the kneecap was not actually in my case what I needed to ice. What I needed to ice was the side. But I was basically icing on top because I didn't have a better idea. Now I have a better idea.
Yeah. So all of those things we feel, all of that, no one likes to feel uncomfortable. And however, when you're feeling uncomfortable, to judge it as that you're doing something wrong spiritually, right? It's like, oh, I must not be working this law of attraction right if I'm experiencing something uncomfortable. I don't agree with that assessment.
Right. Yeah.
I don't agree with that assessment. There are no mistakes. There's just human experience, and we're always in a learning process. So it's part of the process. Trust the process. That's my take on it.
Yeah, it ties right into my most recent catchphrase, my self-developed cliche built off of Abraham's catchphrase. Their catchphrase is, you can't get it wrong and you'll never get it done. And I just turned that into positives by kind of flipping it around and saying, everything I do comes out right and the road goes on forever. And the more I think about that one, the more I like it, the more I feel good with it. Because
I think we talked about this last week, because since I've spoken to you, I said that to someone. I said, you're always getting it right. And I told them the story about you saying, how you switching you're never getting it wrong to, I'm always getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
I like it so much better.
I do too. Yeah. Well, it's much more straightforward. That's the problem with expressing things as negatives, which we routinely as humans do all the time. We constantly express things as negative, and it actually takes effort and awareness and some concentration to flip things around and express them more positively. But when we express them positively, they're actually more direct. You know what I mean? That's more specifically, yes, this is what I'm aiming for, this is what I'm hoping for. That, it's that kind of directness, as opposed to not that. No, I don't really want that. This is not what I'm looking for. It's more indirect when you say what you don't want.
Well, I remember one day we took a paragraph that we were reading from this book. I'm not sure which one. It's been a few weeks, but we deconstructed it, because the whole paragraph was written like that. And we changed it to positives. And by the time we got it changed to positives, like 3 short sentences.
Yes, right.
And what was funny was that it really kind of triggered my reticular activation about that, right? It's like, once we did that and you talked about it, I was paying attention that week. And somebody sent me a kind of a meme, a graphic image with a bunch of words on it, because they wanted to post it. They wanted me to post it in a group that I run. And I didn't post it, and I haven't done this yet. I need to change it around. But first of all, it was very, very long, and it had a lot of words. And the title of it was "What Not to Do." And then it was very long, and it said things like, don't let other people get you down, right? It was all, every single sentence, and it was long, was in the negative. And it was all very good sentiment. It was supposed to be uplifting, but I thought, wow, I really want to rewrite this whole thing in the positive, the way we were talking about, because I think it would be so much more powerful if it was written that way.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And that's the thing that I keep noticing too. I think it's one of the reasons why I decided to start flipping things around, because when I get something like a meme, a post that somebody posts on a social media, an email that somebody passed along to me, whatever, whenever I get something like that and it's expressed in the negative, I find an interesting thing going on. First of all, it's familiar, because I'm used to getting that kind of negative expression stuff. And second of all, I noticed that I actually do a lot of work mentally when I get that, when I see one of those. I don't realize it because I'm so used to doing it, but we all do this. We do a lot of work because we're interpreting, what does this mean? 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 And we've heard these negative phrases so much that it doesn't take a lot to do the interpreting. But when I'm doing it, when I'm actually reading it, I can notice the effort that's in it, and it's more effort than I would have thought of. Now, it does take quite a bit of effort to kind of flip it around and say, okay, so what does that actually translate to if I say it positively? But once you do say it positively, and once you kind of get into the habit of saying it positively, it's so much easier. You don't have to even think twice. It's just bang, yes, I agree, I'm there, I'm with you. That's how quickly the response is when you see it expressed positively. There's actually effort involved. We don't notice it, but there's actually effort involved in having to deal with negative expressions of positive sentiments.
Well, there is. I mean, I remember the effort it took us to deconstruct that paragraph and rewrite it.
Oh, yeah.
It was like, and there's also the idea that our brain does not, how is it? Is that our subconscious sort of ignores the negative words. That's why they tell you, if you're making an affirmation, to never phrase it in the negative.
Or to put it another way, always phrase it in the positive.
Right. Always phrase it in the positive. Right.
Yeah. There it is again, right?
A lot of people want to stop doing certain things, and so they will immediately go towards that. And sometimes it makes me wonder why there's so much of it in the Abraham books. Because there's a lot of it.
I think it's in there because Abraham recognizes that's the way we express things to each other. I mean, they're talking to a mass audience. They're talking to a large audience, and they know that audience has certain characteristics, and one that we've identified, which is people express things negatively, habitually. So that's the way they figure we're going to be best able to understand what they're saying. And I can understand the argument. In fact, I could even see a criticism coming up if they tried to express it all as positive. I wouldn't agree with it, but I could see it. The criticism
the whole book would only be 4 pages long.
Well, there's that one, yes. But there's also the one that would say, oh, well, that's just all airy-fairy. That's all pie in the sky. It's not believable because it's not filled with negatives.
It's so interesting. And now I'm going to be on this again. I'll be paying attention how many times I hear. But I did think that was so funny to get that meme and have it, the title of it, "This is what you don't do." That's what it was. This is what you don't do. Instead of just do this.
I can't remember who it was. There was a comedian who was doing a routine, and I don't remember anything about the routine at all. The only thing I remember is this one little piece. And he sets himself up to do what he's presenting as this wonderful, great cliche that will save you from everything. And he starts off by saying, always, no, never, and just instantly starts turning it into a negative. He came out, he was going to start going into a positive. No, can't do that. Turn it into a negative.
That's funny.
Yeah, it is.
But it's really true. I mean, I've even done it right now in our conversation, right? With saying, you should never. Yeah. So it is ingrained in us. It's a habit.
And but fortunately, it is a habit.
It's a habit for everyone. I mean, in other words, because language, I'm curious to know how it translates across, languages.
Oh, I bet you'd find it in all languages.
That it's a habit?
Yeah.
A construct we use in every language?
I mean, there are certain languages. English is one of the most complex languages. So you can have lots of different ways of expressing stuff. Other languages, you're more constrained in terms of how you can express stuff. But I'd be willing to bet that, like, at least a majority of the time, and probably the vast majority of the time, in any language, stuff gets expressed in the negative, whatever the negative form is for that language. Yeah.
Maybe we'll get an email from a linguist that will.
They'll probably say I'm full of it. That's all right.
No. Well, we have been reading for quite a while and really tearing into and kind of tearing apart and examining this book, Money and the Law of Attraction, Learning to Attract Wealth, Health, and Happiness by Esther and Jerry Hicks. It was a #1 New York Times bestseller. I wouldn't be surprised to see it still on a bestseller list. It's been around for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
But we've been really, really tearing into it and learning tools to help us attract wealth, health, and happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we learned the tools, we talked about money. And now we're on the section of the book we've been talking about physical well-being. And I think we'll be moving into health. Because here we've got the subtitle today, focus on fun to regain one's health. And I think that the older that we get, the more we often are faced with a situation of wanting to regain health.
Yep.
I mean, I think a lot of people may agree with that. Maybe not.
Well, it's been my experience, certainly in the last few months, I've had plenty of that. Not that I've had a tremendous downturn in health, but most of my life I paid no attention to health, and now all of a sudden I'm finding myself paying attention to health. So something shifted.
I don't know how true this is, but I read something once that said that things in our health, that things that come as a result of what we're doing, like day to day. Like one of the examples was skin damage from sun. It shows up like 20 years past the time. So in other words, when you're in your 20s and you're running around on the beach all day, every day, and when I was in my 20s, now I never did this, but people used to rub like baby oil on themselves.
Oh yeah.
And then bake themselves out in the sun. I mean, Oof. Like we were like deep frying ourselves out there. No sunscreen. There wasn't any sunscreen. It was like a sun amplifier. That when you're doing that when you're 20, that the skin damage from it doesn't show up until you're in your 40s, so
and then you have leather skin.
Yeah, I'm thinking, well, as we go through life and we live a certain way and we think to ourselves, well, it's not bothering me, right? The sun, oh yeah, I'm fine in the sun or whatever it is. It starts to show up later. And when those things start to show up, that's often when we are faced with wanting to regain our health, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, oh yeah, I want to turn back the clock now to when my body felt better or whatever. So before we dive in though.
Plus we also have to add in the fact that we are now inundated in a way that you and I weren't when we were much younger. We're inundated with all of the negatives about health. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do this. You don't eat this. You don't put that on. Don't wear this. Just endless things.
And then in 6 months they change.
And then they change, right? Oh no, that's okay. Just don't do this instead.
Eggs are bad. Don't eat eggs. So wait, exactly. Eggs are okay. Eat eggs.
Yep.
Butter is bad. Don't eat butter. Wait, butter is actually healthy. Yeah. So, it can be confusing to try to keep up with things.
To say the least, yes.
But let's talk about quickly before we dive in about how our listeners can subscribe to the podcast.
Oh, well, of course, because they are our favorite people. I've said that now for a few weeks. I love our listeners. I think they're wonderful. We've got a chance to talk to some of them on the podcast and exchange messages through emails and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And I tell you, our listeners are among the most amazing people. The lifestyles they've chosen to live, the things they focus on, the ways that they want to leverage the law of attraction in their lives. I mean, far beyond, the secret with, well, I just want a big house and I want to make a lot of money and all that. They hardly even look at that stuff. They're applying it in ways that Rhonda Byrne never even conceived of. And I love it. I just love the fact that they're like that. So thank you for being a listener, especially if you're one of our longtime listeners. But if you're one of the new listeners, here's how to become a longtime listener. Get a free subscription, because it feeds all of our podcast episodes right to your smartphone, and you can play it anytime that you want to, whether you're traveling to or from work or, doing stuff around the house or whatever, or even if you just like playing stuff in the background. There are a lot of people who like to do that. They play their favorite TV or radio show in the background. Well, you can play our podcast in the background. Well, subscribing is absurdly easy. You just go to the homepage, loatoday.net. All the instructions are right there. The button to click is right there. It even tells you how and what to do if you have an iPhone versus an Android or whatever. So all the instructions are right there. It takes about a minute. It's free. And then when you're done with that, there are about 50 million social media buttons you can click to say, hey, I just subscribed to LOA Today, and I hope you will too.
50 million. There really are a lot of social media buttons there.
Well,
there
36
are
million
social media channels that I'd never heard of before. I was like, what is this?
Yeah, right.
Okay, I think we've got it covered. Yes, so we like to think of our audience as a group of people that when we set intentions, we can hold that whole group, all of you, in a space of success.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, but because part of it is we want that feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
It's really fun for us. It's wonderful for us to get emails and phone calls and feedback about how well you're doing with using the law of attraction and with creating the kind of life that you want. And so when we hear that, we're celebrating it. And so, of course, we want to hear it. So that's what we intend for you as our audience. Success.
That's right. Yeah. In fact, I'll tell you, that was one of the impetuses behind the book. I mean, the book, we drew stories from life coaches and so forth. But what kind of got it going, well, it was two factors. First, it was you and Wendy telling me about the multi-author books you guys had been involved with. And second of all, it was some of the recent, at that point in time, recent contacts we'd had from listeners. And I'm thinking, wow, our listeners have great stories. There must be a lot of great stories out there. I wonder if we could collect them in a book.
It's wonderful. And so, yeah, it keeps going. We want to create more and more of those.
Oh, there'll be more books for sure. No doubt at all. So, okay, shall we dive into it?
Let's dive in. If you're in the paperback version like I am, we're at the middle of page 122, and we've got Jerry asking Abraham questions. So, Walt, you go ahead and read Jerry's question.
Okay. Jerry asks, Norman Cousins was an author who contracted a disease that was considered to be incurable. And he says in parentheses, I don't think anyone has ever recovered from it. But he survived it, and he said he was able to do so by watching a series of humorous television programs. I understand that he just watched these programs and laughed, and the disease went away. What would you say was behind his recovery?
And Abraham says his recovery was accomplished because he achieved vibrational alignment with well-being. There are two primary factors involved in his finding vibrational alignment. First, his desire for wellness was dramatically enhanced by his illness. And second, the programs he watched distracted him from the illness. The pleasure that he felt as he laughed at the humor of the programs was his indication that his disallowance of well-being had ceased. Those are the two factors required in the creation of anything. Want it and allow it.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, once people have focused upon problems and such enough that they have disallowed their well-being, they are seriously ill. They then turn their undivided attention to the illness, thus perpetuating it more. Sometimes a doctor can enhance your belief in wellness if he has a process or a remedy that he believes will help you. In that case, the desire is amplified because of the illness, and the belief is enhanced because of the proposed remedy. But in the case of the supposedly incurable disease, or in the case of the supposedly curable disease, the two factors that brought about the healing were the same: desire and belief. Anyone who can come to expect well-being can achieve it under any conditions. The trick is to expect well-being, or, as the man in your example did, simply distract yourself from the lack of well-being.
Yeah, this is an interesting section for a number of reasons. Well, first of all, because the Norman Cousins story is a really great story. It's one of the early stories that helped solidify and lend credence and substantive evidence to the burgeoning law of attraction movement as it was emerging in like the 1980s and 1990s. And the fact that he used laughter, now he did this like 20 or 30 years before that, the fact that he used laughter to heal himself flew in the face of conventional medicine at the time. But he succeeded, and the most that conventional medicine was able to say was, well, there's always an exception. They couldn't attribute it to him actually having done anything. But I guess what I'm leading up to is a conversation that Joel had with one of his friends who is very, very much a skeptic of law of attraction, basically such a high-level skeptic that he just rejects it entirely. And he had a conversation with Joel in which it was almost confrontational, because he was basically going to try to convince Joel that Joel was believing in nonsense. And they went back and forth, and at one point Joel's friend said to him, well, Joel, you realize that all this law of attraction stuff and all this other stuff you've been talking about, it's really nothing more than what you believe. And Joel said, exactly.
Exactly.
Now you finally understand. It's all about the belief. So when Norman Cousins was watching those television programs, he was doing two things. He was doing three things, actually. I mean, Abraham points out two of them. One is he was distracting himself from the illness, and the second was he was allowing, through the laughter and so forth, to let the healing in, because he already had the strong desire. But there's also a third factor. Yeah,
he believed it was going to work, right?
He believed it was going to work. Yeah. That's the one. I mean, when Joel told me that story, my first reaction was to put out a little shout out to the entire scientific community saying, I don't care if you don't believe in the law of attraction. Just study, please study the placebo effect more. There's such a mountain of data there, and you guys have access to it. You guys have everything that can be known about it so far. Do some more study with it. I think you're going to find some amazing stuff there. And I know they would, because the placebo effect is all about belief. If you believe you're going to heal, you will. Well, that's a wonderful cure.
I was really fortunate. Both of my parents, who neither one of them are living now, but they both at one point in their life beat cancer.
Wow.
And when I look back, I realized, well, the one thing that we did, especially with my dad, is we had him watching funny movies. We sent jokes. We called him and told him jokes. Like, we were just determined to keep him laughing, because we believed that was part of the cure, so to speak.
So you implemented the Norman Cousins method. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we did. And the other thing that was not within my, realm, but I'm thankful for, was that both of them had doctors that believed in healing, or believed that it was possible to heal from these things that some people would have said they were incurable. Because I know, like, in both of their cases, the cancer had metastasized into many areas of their body: bone, brain, liver. I mean, so I know a lot of people would have said, oh, well, it's so far gone. You have, given them a time, like you have so many weeks to live or something. But neither one of them had doctors that did that. And I don't know if it's just, better to give a patient hope and better news. I mean, I think it is, than saying, yeah, that this is incurable. But those are the tactics that we used, among some other things. But it was like, let's laugh. Let's just keep him laughing.
Yeah, sure.
And so it's funny to see this, because I didn't know this story about Norman Cousins.
Oh,
but
really?
Apparently it's a well-known story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's been around for over 50 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I think it's, I mean, I've experienced it, with someone close to me, that it definitely did help. And you said that you've got, is it a sister-in-law, someone that has done the actual research?
Yes.
That showed that that actual laughter causes a reaction in the body that causes our immune system to start fighting.
Right. Yeah. My sister-in-law, Ilona June Thiessen, is pursuing a PhD. I'm not quite sure what the exact topic is right now, something associated with the neurosciences. And in the course of her research, she once discovered, not once, but she discovered over time that there were a series of studies and experiments done that basically demonstrated the fact that science is now able to visualize through various, machines and so forth. They can actually visualize from the moment that a person laughs all the way through the body to the point where healing takes place, where diseased cells get removed and invading organisms get killed off and so forth. There's a direct path that they can trace when you piece together all the researches that they've done, and they can actually visualize it through actual recording systems that they have. They can see the whole process taking place, and that's amazing. Phenomenal. That's phenomenal, because it means that laughter heals. Now, has it gotten any attention? No, but nevertheless, it heals. Laughter heals, and it has a direct effect. And I've even experienced it directly. I mean, I'm very happy to say I have had no dread diseases, and I have no intention of ever having one. I intend to have a happy and healthy life. But nevertheless, there have been times where, I felt a little bit sick, or I felt a little bit this or that, minor injuries, whatever. And laughter, you can, if you test it yourself, if you just try it out and compare, okay, here's where I'm feeling right now, and kind of take inventory of, what's wrong and that sort of thing. And then decide on what modality you're going to use to focus on where you want to be instead, and get into the high feeling place, and compare them and contrast them. You really can notice, if you include laughter in that formula, where the laughter makes a shift in your experience of whatever it is you're dealing with. You can actually detect it yourself if you're willing to be conscious of it, consciously aware of it. And I find that amazing. I mean, I also find like, wow, why don't I have a better skill at doing this? You know, there's the part of me that says, I feel like I'm way behind the curve, or I should say, I feel like we're way behind the curve in terms of utilizing this thing to our benefit. But wow, what a powerful thing to recognize it. And you get quick results. That's the thing. You get a quick response. It's not like you instantly cure yourself, but you can tell just by experimenting with it that the laughter actually makes a small shift that you can feel. And that alone tells you, wow, I really do have power over my own healing. That's a cool thing.
Well, you know, it's funny. When I was first coaching people, I used to use, and I still do sometimes, but I had this phrase, I would say, self-care boot camp. Mm. And I chose that word, which I've second guessed it a lot, but just to emphasize that this is sort of extreme self-care. Like you should take care of yourself all the time. True. But I had certain things that I would do in my life that were on my own extreme self-care list when I was under more stress, you know, when things got tough, so to speak, whatever was happening. And I mean, for me, it was make sure to drink more water, eat more protein, maybe do a longer yoga session, you know, just little things that I could say, yeah, I need to do this because I'm feeling depleted or I'm feeling like I'm under a lot of stress. But what I started adding to that list, and everyone makes their own list, right? I mean, for you, it may be completely different things. Maybe I need an extra walk this week, or maybe, you know, whatever. I mean, different things for different people that fit them. But somewhere along the line, I started adding in, know a handful of movies that make you laugh. Like, so you don't have to think about it. So that's you good. Know which ones to put in. Yeah. You know, around here, it might not be movies. It might be all the old Seinfeld episodes.
Ah, yes. Okay.
Right? Because we know them by heart and we know they make us laugh. So that's the thing is laughter has to go on that list now because it's so important.
And a key element, I want to make sure I emphasize this because Yona pointed this out to me. When you watch something that's funny, particularly something you've seen before, you don't get the same benefit if you don't physically laugh. Mm-hmm. It's the physical laughter that does most of it. Yeah, but out loud laughter. And if actually, I have even recommended to people, if you have something that you find that is funny and you're not laughing, force yourself to laugh the first couple times. Mm-hmm. It really does make a difference. It kind of gets you into the laughter gear, kind of like a comedian would do, because that's what a comedian wants to do, right? They want to get you laughing and then keep laughing, just keep throwing stuff at you to make the laugh continue. You know, they want to get the momentum going, so to speak. Well, you have to get it started. That's where comedians, you know, they either sink or swim with getting you started. If they can get you started, then they're great. If they have trouble getting you started, then they bomb and now they're booed off stage. But that's the life of a comedian, but it's also the life of somebody who wants to heal through laughter. You have to kind of push yourself to laugh a little bit. But once you've done that enough and you can feel the momentum start to take place so that as more and more of the jokes come your way or the funny lines or whatever, you can laugh more easily to them. That's really key. You've done two things. First of all, you've got the laugh momentum going. And second of all, you got the healing process going.
Right. It's like the laughter yoga.
Yes, laughter yoga. Well, although I have to say laughter yoga is weird. Let's just put it very bluntly. It is just plain weird. It is. I'm sorry, I've
never gone to a laughter yoga class, but I've actually listened to one before. And I thought it was so funny because at the beginning, everyone's totally faking laugh. It's like everyone's actually doing ha, 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 ha.
Yeah, ha, 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 ha. Yeah.
But at some point along the line, it really turns into just all out uncontrollable belly laughter.
Oh yeah, well that's the point because you get that momentum going, and once you do get it going, it just kind of rolls and rolls and keeps going and builds and builds.
What I was thinking about was that I've heard people say, because you were talking about things you've seen before, and I was thinking also if you're watching by yourself.
Oh yeah,
like people tend to laugh out loud more when they're watching something with someone else.
True. Yeah.
And it's the same. I'm thinking of like the laughter yoga. If you're in a class, you know, 2 or more people, it's like that laughter starts to feed off of each other. And like you said, use the great word, the momentum of it
Yeah.
built up. And so when you're watching something by yourself that's funny, you may be laughing sort of inside and not really physically laughing too much. And so just to be conscious of that, like Walt said, and just start to laugh out loud.
Yeah, it makes a difference. Makes a huge difference.
So get that list. It took me some brainstorming. I had to think what I actually asked one time on social media. I was coming down with something, like feeling like I had a cold, the flu, something. And I asked on social media, what's your favorite funny movie? Because I knew I was going to just start watching funny movies. Or what's the funniest movie you've ever seen? And I got a long list. So
I was just also realizing, I was thinking about the placebo effect again. And placebo is usually defined in scientific circles in a way, this is not a scientific definition, but it's somewhat close. It's kind of defined in a way that says, if there is improvement, but there shouldn't have been because there was no actual medical treatment applied, then we'll call that placebo effect. And the only problem I have with that is I like the fact that that is a placebo effect, but I think the placebo effect idea should be extended. And it does require some research to do this. And it's going to take some really creative putting studies together in order to figure out how to test for this. But I'm really willing to believe that even with the medical cures, placebo effect is going on. So if you get the medication or you get the treatment or whatever it is, and you get better, science wants to say, "Oh, it was just the treatment," but I want to say there's a placebo effect going on even with successful treatment, and that's the part I really want science to delve into.
Sure, because what if you and I are both experiencing the same symptom and we're both given the same treatment, and you absolutely are excited because you believe this treatment is the answer, it's going to help you, and I have absolutely no faith in the treatment and I don't think it's going to work. That has to have some effect in our healing process.
Oh yeah, and that's a more extreme example of it, but it does clarify, how important the belief is. I would go another step further and say science recognizes that there are situations where even with the prescribed treatment, the person doesn't get better and they don't know why. Right. Well, maybe it's time to find out why. Maybe it's time to look at the placebo as a way of understanding why, what's going on there. Maybe placebo actually influences it, just along the lines of what you described.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about just a spontaneous healing where no one really knows why something. I actually think we've all experienced that.
Well, sure, yeah. I wasn't just thinking of a spontaneous healing. I was thinking healing that is prescribed healing. They actually heal, but you can give, it's like you were saying, you can give 100 people the same medication for the same treatment, and 60 of them will respond, and 20 of them won't respond, and 40 will, 30, what's remainder there? 20 will have a partial response, and science can't tell us why. Theoretically, once you've shown that there is a scientific improvement, a scientifically measurable improvement, statistically measurable improvement in using a particular medication, then, why doesn't it always work? Now the answer science usually gives is, well, everybody's different, they have different bodies, and so on and so forth. I'd like them to look at what the role the placebo effect plays in that, because I think if they could find ways to isolate that in their studies, I think they would have tremendous strides forward in terms of understanding why medications work in some cases and not in other cases.
So our belief plays into so much.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of, there's actually a book, but it was very hard to read for me. Kind of dry, but I think it was called Molecules of Belief. Was that the name of it? Do you know?
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking about?
I recognize that title. Who wrote that?
I think it was Candace Pert, but I'm not.
Yes, I think you're right. It was Candace Pert. Yes.
So it was sort of hard to read, but I mean, for me anyway, and I have had other people tell me the same thing, just because I think it was very academic, scientific kind of not a lot of stories, maybe. I'm not sure, but
Mm-hmm.
it's been a lot of years, so I can't remember why I struggled with getting through it. But I loved the premise of it. And that was the premise, is that our beliefs have actual effect on us physically.
And Candace Pert was an amazing person. I mean, she was a medical researcher. And
yeah.
she was a medical researcher on the leading edge of a lot of the stuff that was going on in the 1970s. I mean, she played a significant role. She discovered some of the neurotransmitters we now know. I mean, she played very significant roles in a lot of the accumulation of knowledge that happened during that time. And so she is definitely an authority. I mean, the only sad part is that she passed a couple of years ago. But other than that, I mean, her contribution really has been undervalued. I would say her contribution needs to be valued more than it has by the medical community, because it's truly staggering how much she contributed.
So that's a good book to dive into if you're wanting to learn more about that.
That's also why it's dry, because she is a medical
of emotion.
Yeah, that's right, and she is a scientist. That's why it's dry. She never learned how to tell stories. She was in the lab all the time.
Molecules of Emotion: The Science Behind Mind-Body Medicine. That's the complete title.
Yes.
So what we believe is going to have a direct reflection on how we heal. But also, I like this idea, and that is, first of all, we can choose what to believe. And I think that's important for us to remember.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes people feel like, well, I don't believe that. Like, it's unchangeable. Like, these are the things that I believe. This is who I am. Well, we can decide to believe something new. And if we want to facilitate healing, we can start with the very simple belief, and we can base it on the Norman Cousins story, because there's an example.
Yep.
The very simple belief that laughter is a serious part of our healing process, and that we are going to take advantage of that and consciously choose to laugh, because
huge.
by whatever means, we're going to watch funny movies or watch funny TV shows or read a funny book or listen to jokes or comedians or whatever. That's a pretty simple new belief to adopt if you're wanting to facilitate healing in your body, right? It's just like, okay, I heard a story about a person that had a so-called incurable disease, and the way he healed himself was through watching TV shows that made him laugh out loud. So I'm going to do that because I know it's going to help me facilitate healing.
And I want to add something that is reflective of me and where I was. Because years ago, my response would have been what a lot of skeptics say. And that is, well, you've got to be realistic. You just got to be realistic about this stuff. And you know what ultimately helped me to break that pattern of wanting to be realistic all the time? I finally asked myself the most important question about it, which is, why? Why is it so important to be realistic? Because that's the one thing that someone who says, well, you got to be realistic, will never tell you. And I realized I would never even tell myself. There was like this hidden explanation that, well, you have to be realistic because you have to be prepared for what's going to happen because it's outside of your control. That's what was really meant by it. But the moment that you put the question, well, why do you have to be realistic? Now the person who is saying the skeptical things has to actually volunteer. Well, you got to be prepared to die. And that's not so easy to get to.
Right. I like this idea better. I heard about somebody who healed himself through laughing, and I'm going to try this.
Suddenly, being realistic isn't all that it's cracked up to be.
Seriously. And if you're feeling better and better, you know.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. No, you don't have to be realistic. Actually, being realistic is probably not a good idea. Unless you're done with this life. If you're done with the life, then great, be realistic. But
right, then we can go into philosophy and say, well, what is reality, right?
Yeah, well, there's that too, yeah.
So, did ignoring the illness resolve the illness?
That's a good question. Jerry asks, throughout my adult life, I've never been so sick that I wasn't able to do the work I intended to do that day. In other words, I always felt my work was so important that I didn't consider not doing it. I noticed, however, that if I was beginning to feel less than good, like if I was in the beginning stages of a cold or flu, once I got focused on what I needed to do in terms of my work, the symptoms went away. Is that because I was focused on something that I wanted?
Before I read Abraham's answer, I just want to say what's funny, what came into my head, what I thought he was going to say was that, but if there was something else that he wasn't as interested in, right? Like he's saying that a cold or a flu never stopped him. He never had a sickness that stopped him from doing his work because his work was so important. But I thought, well, did he ever have a sickness that kept him from going on a date he didn't really feel excited about or go? That was where my brain was headed. Okay. So Abraham says, because you had a strong intention to do your work and because you enjoyed it when you did it, you had the advantage of a strong momentum toward your well-being. So when it seemed that something was detracting from that well-being because of some attention to something unwanted, you had only to focus upon your usual intention and your alignment returned quickly, and the symptoms of misalignment faded quickly. Often you try to accomplish too much through action, and in doing so, you feel tired or overwhelmed, and those feelings are your indicator that it's time to stop and refresh. But often you push forward in action rather than taking the time to refresh and realign, and that is a very common reason for uncomfortable symptoms to begin to surface. Most people, when they feel a symptom of sickness, begin to give their attention to the symptom and usually slide rapidly into more discomfort and misalignment. The key is to catch your misalignment early. In other words, whenever you feel negative emotion, that is your signal to reach for a different thought to improve your vibrational balance. But if you do not, your signal will get stronger and eventually you may feel physical discomfort. But even then, as in the example you just stated, you can still refocus upon something that you desire, taking your attention from whatever has you out of balance, and come into alignment. And the symptoms of sickness must then leave. There is no condition from which you cannot recover, but it is much easier if you catch it in the early, subtle states. Sometimes being sick provides you an escape from something else that you do not want to do. And so in your environment, there is much allowing of sickness for the sake of not having to do something else. But when you begin playing that sort of game with self, you're opening the door to greater and greater and greater sickness.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So that's exactly the point I was wondering if they would talk about, because I recognize that sometimes I think we create little minor problems because it's serving us in some way.
And elaborate on that. Serving us in what way? What do you mean?
Well, oftentimes when things are happening in our life that I'm making air quotes, right, that we think are something going wrong, mm-hmm. And that we're trying to change or saying we want to change, there's often a counter intention or a payoff. And that's one of the things that we do in coaching is take a deeper look at what the payoff might be. And so, in other words, someone who is saying that they want to move somewhere else and they're looking for a job and they just can't find it, and then come to find out, there's a payoff that's sort of underneath the layers of desire that's like, well, I really didn't want to move away from family or whatever. I mean, oftentimes we complain about one thing, but there's some other thing attached to it that actually, it's serving us in some way. There's some kind of payoff. And so that's why I was asking as soon as Jerry said, well, I love my work and I've never let any kind of sickness keep me from my work. My first thought was, well, I wonder what he did let any kind of sickness keep him from. If so, maybe nothing, but maybe something. And so it's interesting that Abraham says, well, oftentimes we are okay with certain sickness because it's allowing us, it's giving us permission to kind of say no to something that we're not real interested in.
That's a good point. Yeah. Now, how do you use that? Like, I guess it depends what the motivation is of the person who's experiencing it. Do they want to get better? Do they want to change something? Do they want to focus on some other situation entirely? It depends what they want, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying that we always do it consciously.
Mm.
But I think that there are instances where, I mean, I've certainly heard stories that people have told about an accident or an injury or a sickness that happened, and they realized, after the fact that they really, that injury or accident or sickness gave them permission to not, be doing a certain thing that they really didn't want to do.
Yeah.
It's not the best way to get out of something that we don't want to do. And I think that's why Abraham is pointing out at the end that says, sometimes being sick provides you an escape from something else that you do not want to do. Mm-hmm. And so in your environment, there's much allowing of sickness for the sake of not having to do something else. But when you begin playing that sort of game with self, you're opening the door to greater and greater and greater sickness. Yeah, I think it's much better to allow yourself to set boundaries and to say no to things that you don't want, instead of to just say yes. I think that's what happens. That sometimes we say yes to things we really don't want out of obligation or guilt or thinking we should, or maybe we feel bullied into saying yes to something, and our body really doesn't want to do it. Our inner self doesn't really want to do it. So we manufacture or we allow ourselves to get sick because that's like an accepted excuse.
Right. Yeah.
I remember, and it's something that I've taught a lot of people, that, the fact that you really don't want to do something is enough. Mm-hmm. A lot of times people feel like they need a valid excuse.
Yeah.
To say, no, I'm not interested in doing that. And of course, say, oh no, I think I'm coming down with something. I woke up with a sore throat. That's always going to be a valid excuse, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that's so, true. Yeah, don't use those things.
You don't need to. No.
Find a better way. Don't play. I love Abraham says, when you start playing that game with yourself, don't play that game.
Exactly. Oh yeah. I also liked what they said earlier when they said often you try to accomplish too much through action, and in doing so you feel tired or overwhelmed, and those feelings are your indicator that it's time to stop and refresh. But often you push forward in action rather than taking the time to refresh and realign, and that is a very common reason for uncomfortable symptoms to begin to surface. I now try to keep that in mind. The moment that I'm feeling something that I don't like, I'm trying to train myself that my first move is to get back into alignment. And that does take some training because we're not used to that. So I have to, consciously stop myself and say, okay, I know that I don't like where that's going. I don't like the way that's feeling. It's time to realign. Let's get into a happy feeling place. What can I do to get into that happy feeling place? That takes a little
and
deliberate.
We can get good at it where it's
we
quick.
Can. Yeah. Yeah. But you have to do it. That's where mindfulness, the word mindfulness, I always had trouble with it. That's where mindfulness actually makes sense to me. That's the time to really be mindful.
It is. And to be aware of what we're feeling.
What we're feeling and how do we feel about it? How do we feel about what we're feeling? Right?
Yeah.
Because that's really at the root of it. Well, we have less than a minute left. Before we go, I don't often ask this, but I want to make sure I ask you this time. For someone who wants more personal attention, how do they reach out to you?
They can find me at cindiechavez.com, CINDIECHAVEZ.com. Cindie Chavez, same name on all the social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Just come find me.
Sounds great.
Say hello.
It's been a pleasure. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.
I'll be here tomorrow.
I'll be here as well. We hope you join us too here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.